Hello and welcome to Tort Town, a lovely little place where there are a surprisingly large number of torts. People are injured, but they ultimately go on to make miraculous and complete recoveries. And today, first up, we're going to see how the but-for test of causation plays out in practice. So here we have car driver, okay? We know from Nettleship versus Weston that car drivers owe duty of care to other road users. You can draw an analogy, okay? So don't need to use the Capero three-part test. And as we can see, if we look carefully, this car driver is on his telephone, okay? So that is potentially negligent, okay? Falling below the standard of care that we would expect from the reasonable driver. And round the corner here comes a cyclist. Okay, so the driver's moving through there, cyclist coming around the corner, and boom! The cyclist has been knocked over. He's going to be fine, he's injured, but he's going to be fine ultimately. But now he's going to sue the car driver in negligence. So we've established duty of care, we've established breach, falling below the standard of care, and now we have to ask the causation question. And the standard sort of causation question, which comes from Barnett versus Chelsea and Kensington Hospital, is but for the defendant's negligence, would the accident still have happened? Okay, so negligence is being on the phone, but for the defendant being on the phone, would the accident still have happened? If it's yes, okay, if the answer to the but for question is yes, if the accident would still have happened, even if the driver had not been on the phone, okay, let's say he couldn't see the cyclist because the cement mix is in the way, okay, so if the accident would still have happened, he could not have seen the cyclist and would still have hit him, even if he hadn't been on the phone, then we say that his negligence, okay, is not the cause of the accident, and the cyclist claim will fail, okay, because he would have been hit anyway, and the driver's negligence, being on the phone, was not the cause of the accident, okay. So, but for the driver's negligence, but for the negligence, would the accident still have happened? If it would still have happened anyway, okay, then we say that the driver's negligence is not the cause of the accident, because it was going to happen anyway. If the accident would not have happened, okay, if the driver had not been on the phone, we say that they are the cause of the injury, and we pass that third hurdle, and we go on to consider whether there are any defences and so forth. So, but for test of causation. Next up, we have the material contribution to harm exception to the but-for test of causation. So one of two exceptions to the but-for test we're going to look at. So, if we see here, we have a chap, and he's working with cement, and unfortunately he's going to go on to suffer a lung illness due to an accumulation of this dust in his lungs. Now, some of the dust some of the inhalation is unavoidable as a part of that occupation. Okay, so that's a non-negligent exposure. It's not, the employer hasn't done anything wrong. That's just a part of the exposure that he will suffer as a result of that employment. However, the employer has also been negligent and failed to provide him with the necessary sort of safety gear, perhaps some sort of breathing apparatus. Okay? So, as a result of this, some dust has some of the dust is some of the inhalation, okay, as a result of a non-negligent source, and some as a result of negligent exposure. Okay? Now, if he goes to sue his employer, okay, saying, I've developed this condition which you develop as a result of exposure to a lot of dust, so accumulation of dust in my lungs over a period of time, he's going to struggle at the causation stage, because he can't prove on the balance of probabilities that his illness would not have happened without the extra negligent exposure. So he can't prove on the balance of probabilities that the defendant's negligent exposure was necessary for him to develop this condition, and it wasn't just a result of accumulation of the dust that he was exposed to that wasn't the result of negligence. However, he can use the material contribution to harm exception in Bonington's castings versus Wardlow, and that says if a disease is a result or a sort of condition, a harm, so material contribution to harm, if a harm is a result caused by cumulative exposure, and some of it was, the exposure was non-negligent, some of it was negligent, the defendant can be said to be liable, okay, because they materially contributed to the development of the condition. Okay, so if you've got some non-negligent exposure and some negligent exposure, the court's prepared to sort of overlook the but-for test and say you materially contributed through your negligence to the development of the condition, and we will allow the claimant to sue. Finally, let's look at the other sort of key exception to the but-for test, which is the McGee-Fairchild material increase in risk exception. And this covers sort of harms caused by a single exposure, single negligent exposure to a dangerous thing, not caused by an accumulation of a thing within the body. Okay, so here we have another worker, and if she's exposed to this harmful dust negligently, okay, and just from that source, then she has no problem. Okay, she can prove on the balance of probabilities 51% that it was the person in charge of that building site who negligently exposed her to that harmful thing. Okay, no problem. However, let's say that some exposure as a result of that dust is non-negligent. Okay, so working on that building site, it's some sort of negligence exposure, or some sort of exposure is inevitable. Okay, so it's not negligent. However, the building site fails to provide adequate sort of cleaning facilities, as in McGee. Okay, and she goes off, cycles home, and as a result of the cycling home, okay, she is exposed negligently to an extra risk from that dust. Okay, in McGee, okay, we had that exact scenario. Okay, so there they had a particular sort of it was brick dust, and the dermatitis. So she's not suffering a cumulative condition; she's suffering dermatitis. Okay, let's say, and that could be caused by the non-negligent exposure or the negligent exposure, but we can't prove on the balance of probabilities, which it was a 50-50 chance it could have been either. In McGee, I say, well, we're going to overlook that. Okay. So she can claim because the defendant's negligence materially increased the risk of this condition developing. Okay, so the McGee exception, McGee-Fairchild exception, covers sort of harms caused where it's caused by a single sort of event or exposure, not the accumulation. And if we can't tell whether scientifically we can't tell whether it was the negligent or non-negligent exposure, then we can sue. Fairchild extended McGee to situations where there were several different negligent employers. All could potentially be liable in negligence, okay, but it's impossible to tell which exposure to this risk caused harm. So let's say she's been negligently exposed whilst working here, and then negligently exposed whilst working here, and then she's worked there as well, okay, and negligently exposed there. So we've got 3 different employers, okay, and all of exposing her to this harmful substance, and no way scientifically of telling which single exposure caused her to develop this harmful condition, okay. And in Fairchild, the court said, well, in this situation, okay, where you've got negligent parties exposing the same risk to the claimants that have all exposed her to the same harmful dust, which can result in the same condition which she subsequently developed, and it's scientifically impossible to tell which single exposure caused the harm, then we're going to say we can bypass the but-for test and hold them all to be liable. And this was further extended in Barker to situations where you've got negligent employers, but also where you've got sort of a sort of self-exposure as well. So where you expose yourself to the condition, and there we say you can still recover you can still recover from the employers, even though one of the exposures was the claimant's own action, also increased the risk. And the Fairchild-McGee exception was sort of further extended in Sinkovich versus Grief, to where you have also, as well as the negligent exposure, a sort of natural natural non-negligent exposure, but sort of naturally within the environment. And they say, yes, we're going to hold the defendants liable there as well.